future references. So I'll start that. Thanks again, Judy and Kat, for all your work pulling this together and getting us ready to launch our 6th cohort of the Women in Leadership Lab, Women in Mining Leadership Lab. And I wanted to take just a minute to talk a little bit about how this program came into being and how we've mindfully curated the content. And then we're going to turn it over to a Q&A discussion with our guests. Today we have Milan Calendine from Hydrogeophysics, Laura Nelson from the Society of Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration, and Ashley Newman from Brooks and Nelson. And these guests were part of our first cohort, and so I thought it'd be valuable to bring them in to share what they've experienced during the lab, but since then, and how it's, potentially impacted their leadership. So to set us up for today, years ago, I met Jill Nelson from Brooks and Nelson. I teach a coaching skills class for leaders and managers at University of Denver Center for Professional Development. And Jill came through the class, and afterwards she said, Maureen, we really could benefit by bringing some of these skills to women in the mining industry. And so it was her brainchild. We pulled together the content to address, specific leadership skills that we thought would be helpful for women in the industry, and launched our first cohort. And one thing that I've noticed after 20 years of working in the leadership development space and as an executive coach is that people often get promoted to a leadership role because they're an expert at what they do. And yet when they get into leadership and all of a sudden their success is based on how they are managing other people to deliver results, it becomes a whole different beast and requires different skills. And I find that people, move into leadership and gain those skills and can be very successful, but that can be a challenging transition. So when we decided to create this program, we wanted to look at what are those foundational skills that really help once you are in charge of other people delivering results. And, it's interesting because a lot of people will choose to be an individual contributor throughout their career, and they have great careers. However, in many organizations, your path of advancement does move through managing teams and moving higher up in leadership. And so it is a set of skills that can be very critical for people's career growth and their trajectory. And interestingly enough, some research came out about 2 years ago that showed men and women enter the workforce in about equal numbers. About 48% of entry-level employees are women, 52% men. So it's pretty equal. But by the time we look at when moving into that first managerial role, for every 100 men that move into a managerial position, 81 women do. So there's a gap there, and they're starting to call that the broken rung. And a lot of that can be contributed by a variety of causes. A lot of it might be systemic, maybe it could be some skill gaps. But I find anything we can do to shore up skills to help people feel ready and eager to move into management, to feel prepared, and then to help them transition so they hit the ground running once they're in leadership can be very effective. And so we planned the program around that way with the goal of each module giving participants something tactical and practical they can put into practice. Throughout the course, we will be talking about some of the research around women in leadership, only to provide a concrete look at what the landscape is. The leadership strategies we use are relevant for anyone. They come from best practices defined by psychology, neuroscience, behavior science, and they apply to leaders across industries, and it doesn't matter if it's men, women. So the program is really valuable for men too, I think. So that is kind of big picture what we're trying to accomplish. At the end of our coffee talk, I'll put up a slide that shows exactly what each of the modules are. But what I'd love to do now is bring our guests into the fold and have a discussion about some of the challenges they've experienced, some of the strategies they've learned. And I invite you as participants to please put questions in the chat. We'll make this an informal discussion. So with that, one of the first questions I think would be interesting for us to discuss is for our guests, as you progress through your career, what are some of the leadership challenges you faced in your roles? And curious who would like to kick us off with that.
I can go first.
Awesome. Thanks, Milan.
Yeah, no, not a problem. So leadership challenges. A lot of time I think that leadership challenges have to do with, the leader personally, like me as a personal, as a person. And I find that we go through a class or we learn these leadership uh, techniques, tactics, lessons, whatever you want to call them. And then when we get into stressful situations, we fall to our baseline, right? We fall back to how we behaved before we learned these tactics, right? Or we weren't able to draw these tactics out at the right time to show leadership. And so I think that's a big challenge for me. And so that takes a lot of self-reflection to make sure you take a step back, realize that um, there are different ways to handle this and, fall into your training, fall into the different things that you've learned and see how they can help you, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of a big challenge that I see is, falling down to your baseline when you're really trying to step up and use the knowledge that you've gained.
Such a great point. Excellent. I'm curious what some of the others think.
To tag on a little bit to what Milan said, I think we also tend to assume that we're the only leader that's facing a particular challenge. And so many managers or leaders have the same challenges. And it was helpful going through the leadership lab just to know or have it be reinforced that no, it's not just me, it's everybody else faces these same challenges around, managing conflict, um, managing a team that might be older than me, or way younger than me, managing difficult team members, not communicating, etc.
Great point.
I
Yeah.
I think for my experience, just exactly what they said. From my personal experience joining Leadership Lab, I joined a company, small company, Brooks and Nelson. We all wear multiple hats. There's a lot of moving parts. When I came in, I was new to the industry. So it was a lot of self-doubt, in which I will say I'm still working through that. But I think the Leadership Lab was able to provide me the tools to know that managing up isn't me being disrespectful. It's just kind of seeing the larger picture, being able to know each individual's strengths and see where I can fit in there and what I can support in. And I think from leadership, I've noticed that at the end of the day, we are all struggling. We all have our own things. It's just trying to process that and being able to have a clear picture of what direction you want to go in and what you can do to take those steps to reach that. So being able to be a part of the leadership lab, have that network and make great connections with other individuals, it helped me realize that, like, oh, I'm not in an island all by myself, right? There's tools, there is other people that are kind of navigating the same issues or the same questions that I do have.
Thank you all for your answers, and it makes me think of several things. One of the comments I often hear is, it's so nice to know I'm not alone. That, these are, typical challenges. And it's an example of integrating some of the research. I know the term imposter syndrome is so big right now, and everybody says, I feel like an imposter. And one of the things we talk about is how the behavior scientists and the psychologists that first coined that term in 1973 say they regret ever calling it a syndrome because it's a universal human experience shared by both men and women. That when we're in stretch roles, when we're trying to do new things, that self-doubt comes out, and it does impact the way we behave, the way we lead, the way we think, and learning how to manage that and deal with that ambiguity is part of a growth process. So really glad you brought that up. And also, Milan, your point about our defaulting to a baseline is, again, another human experience, that we fall into our personality. And yet the growth is, how do we start to be intentional around certain behaviors? And part of what we do in the lab is, at the end of each session, we focus on one thing we want to take away and put into practice. And then we might hook up with an accountability partner by, through a text message or something midweek to say, okay, I've had this experience and I really, I tried to do this as a different approach. And I think that's kind of a way to put some of these ideas into practice. But as you say, Milan, it's a lifelong practice, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go to another question. I'm curious, from a skills perspective, what is the most important skill that you're still mindful of, a couple of years out, that you focused on when you took the lab? And this could be around, a skill around managing conflict. Ashley, you mentioned managing up. It could be a communication skill. Yeah, it could be a reflection skill. But what stood out to you? What has been that skill that you've been most mindful of?
For myself, I would say communication. I think that was my biggest takeaway. I did find value in everything, but I think still to this day, I practice the communication where I know I like to be communicated a certain way. That doesn't mean it's universal for everyone else. So being able to really take in and see, they always say treat people how you would want to be treated. And I think it's very important that we treat people how they would like to be treated. So being able to use those tools that we learned during the leadership lab and have that accountability partner where you get a kind of like an inside look of another situation, and you kind of have that support system, that buddy to kind of, well, this is how I see it. But then you have someone's like, well, these are some tools, right? You give us the tools and we kind of work through them. So I think communication is big for me, and it's kind of a lifelong thing. And it's not just, it's personal life, it's in your work life, it's throughout your whole life. So I think that was my biggest takeaway.
Nice, thank you.
I can jump in. Yeah, I definitely think the communication piece is really important, as Ashley said. And it's also in knowing not only how to communicate, but when, right? For example, I was recently on a project, and in my company, everybody goes in the field. If we're not in the field, we're not making money, from the president to whoever. We are all in the field. And oftentimes as leaders, we're in the field and we're letting younger people take control and kind of run the show, because that's how they learn. And this one particular time, there was a challenge with something that was happening, and the person who was managing the project jumped in right away and said, well, okay, well, I'll come over and help. And that was a moment where I said, hold on, let them struggle. Let them struggle just a little bit. We've got the time, and this is where they learn. And so a lot of times it's about knowing when to let people struggle through a problem, and when to jump in and take an action or do some type of leadership. And then the other thing I'll say is self-reflection is probably the biggest thing. And that is, when you get better at understanding who you are as a person, then you can start to realize and understand who other people are and how they behave and what's meaningful to them, right? Because it's really about understanding the meaning behind people and how they operate.
Excellent, thanks.
I agree with Milan and Ashley. I found all of the sessions really helpful. For me, the session on conflict resolution was especially helpful, I think. Thinking of conflict as how can I get a win-win outcome versus I have to win? You know what I mean? Like, if you go into it with more of a, how can we both come out of this with a positive outcome? That's helpful. And also, I try now to plan and strategize difficult conversations ahead of time. So I really think through, what do I want the outcome to be for both parties? And what are the issues that I think are going to come up versus just diving in and winging it?
Yeah, Laura, I'm really glad you brought up that idea of difficult conversations, because it doesn't matter what level of leadership that I work with in my coaching practice, that is always up front and center for almost every leader, because there's so much riding on some of these difficult conversations. The stakes are high, people want to get it right. And I think having a systematic process of moving through and thinking about it can be really helpful. Milan, I also wanted to comment on your idea of this self-reflection, and that's something that we try and integrate quite a bit in the leadership labs. When leaders can start to have a good handle on the impact that they have and the impact that they want to have, and then managing that gap in between can be huge. And I share a story about Hubert Joly, who was the CEO of Best Buy. And he came into Best Buy when they were struggling. It was around 2000 and I think 2007 or 8. A lot of the big box retailers were going under, and they were trying to match online purchases. So they wanted to compete with the online market. And so they did all these upgrades to their technology. It was they were moving into Black Friday, that Thanksgiving weekend where they did a majority of their year's sales, ready to, the company was going to turn around, everything was great. And the night before, all systems crashed. And Hubert Joly got a call as the CEO in the middle of the night. And so he dressed, ran into the offices, and right before he went into the room where all of his, senior leadership team was, he stopped himself and he said, Hubert, you need to set the emotional temperature for these people. If you're reactionary, they're going to get flustered. They're not going to be able to do what they need to do. And so he was very intentional about what impact did he want his emotional state to have on people, and then how was he going to regulate that? And, that was a very high stakes situation, but we all can be mindful of that when we get on the phone for a phone call, when we go into a meeting, when we're dealing with conflict. What is the impact we want to have? And developing that reflection practice at the end of the day or in the moment, super important. So I'm glad you brought that into the fold there, Milan. Yeah, that's great. Well, let's do one more question. And guests, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'd be happy to answer those. So you all talked a little bit about what you took away from the course. What about if you were to take the course again? What would you do differently? Or maybe what would you make sure to do the same?
Well, I'll jump in. Actually, I think going back to basics is really important, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of information in this really beautiful course. And you can't take away all of it, right? Our brains just don't have that power to take away everything and implement everything and incorporate all these different tactics. So taking it again would be the opportunity to refresh that learning and really dive deeper into what leadership is. And this will probably get me into a little bit of trouble, but I've always thought that leadership it's really about love, right? It's not about, not the romantic kind of love, but the love of thoughtfulness and caring and understanding and empathy and different things like that, right? And how you show up and how you treat people. And
Yeah, very well said.
I love that, Milan. And just to piggyback off of that, he said it, she said it herself. And what I love about it is that it is true. I came in and that is how I carry myself. And so I thought leadership, no, if you show vulnerability, if I come in being myself, that's not going to lead me anywhere. Leaders are strong and people respect them. I have that vision in my mind. And in a industry that it is primarily male dominated, right? I thought, well, there's no way I can make it here. But being able to take Leadership Lab, I learned that leaders look very different, and you could be whatever you would like to be, as long as you've got the drive, the motivation, and you seek those people and those tools like the Leadership Lab. And something that I still do to this day is your handouts, right? Where we had lessons and we jotted notes down as you were having these discussions. I still have them. I probably will always have them because it's good to kind of look back. And I think the importance of, Milan said, taking this course again is you're always evolving. And where I was 3 years ago, it's not where I am today. And I think if you still refresh those tools, you'll be in a different mind space that you can kind of see another angle, right? And see like, oh, when I first took it, I was focused on this, but maybe now I can use these other tools that I thought I didn't need at that time, and I can take those in and work from there. So I think it's definitely a growth opportunity throughout every point. And I would recommend, starting off or in the middle of your career, even if you're at the top, right? Being able to refresh those tools and kind of reminder that it's a growth opportunity, and leadership is not something you master. It's an ongoing process for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley. Laura, do you have anything to add to that?
Only that I really loved the group that I was part of when I did the Leadership Lab. We had a really good diversity in terms of age and levels of experience. We had one man in our group, which was nice. I thought it was a fabulous experience, but I also found myself thinking, I wish I could be doing this with my coworkers, so we all had a common language and a common base of learning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And, I have done this inside organizations because they want a common language to talk about this. So, well, thank you all so much. Let me share my screen here just to do a quick overview of the program. As you can see, it's 8 modules. It's going to start in September. And we talk about communication, managing relationships. We work on some coaching skills. You can read the rest of the topics here. I wanted to mention that we do record each session. So if you have to be gone for one of the classes, it will be on a learning platform. It's recorded, and then you'll have access to those recordings and all of the handouts for 3 months after the lab. But we do encourage people to attend in person because it's the dialogue, it's the breakout sessions, it's working through the exercises that is really valuable. And to look back to what was said earlier, leadership is an evolution. It's all about managing our relationships to produce results. And, we might get it really great with one team, and then we go to a new team that has different dynamics, and we feel like we're at the starting point again. Or, there might be that one relationship that really challenges you, that calls you forth in a different way. That you have to learn how to flex different leadership muscles, like, having those tough accountability conversations, having to be agile when there are a lot of different disruptions affecting you, the industry, the organization, all those sorts of things. So Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you to our great participants and Judy and Kat for organizing. Please reach out to me with any questions you have. I'd be happy to answer those, and hope you have a great day.
Yes, thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Milan and Ashley and Laura, for joining us in our first coffee break. We've got some lessons learned, at least I do, how to make this a little bit better, but I hope everyone enjoyed it and got something out of our little talk. I did throw in a Google form real quick if you guys would like to fill that out. Again, we're always looking for feedback. If you want information on the Leadership Lab, we included the website for WIM on the WIM website, but we also have that in the form. So if you want more information, please give us your email. We'll pass it along to Maureen. Thank you all. We have a couple minutes. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If anyone has any last minute questions, we are going to try to make some more regularly scheduled programming that you all can join similar to this. We have a couple ideas lined up for what we want to do for our members, but we're always looking for that feedback of what would you guys like to learn. But thank you again to all of our wonderful speakers and guests today.
Thanks, Kat. Thank you, Maureen.
Thanks.
Thank
Have a great day,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Can you stop recording, Maureen?
I can pause it.